Welcome on to the next episode of the Faster Beyond 50 podcast. It is so good to have you with us. Today, my name is Brad Nadauld. We've got the coach Lindsay Parry with us. And today we are going to be talking about a whole bunch of things because it is one of our special Q&A episodes. We've got some great questions that have been submitted from our community. We've got questions about pacing, about building training blocks long-term towards your long-term goal. We're going to talk about track and field recovery for track and field athletes and how to safely increase your mileage, and then also how to come back from a massive injury. Lindsay, great to catch up. Are you well?
Yeah, very good. Thanks, Brad. Looking forward to a good week.
Yeah, absolutely. We've got some wonderful questions. And as always, if you have a question you'd like to get answered here on the podcast, all you need to do is click on the link that's in the description of the audio player that you're listening on, or on the video on YouTube. In the description, there's a link. You can click on that. You can ask your question. We do filter the video questions up to the top. We love seeing and hearing you. So if you do have a question you'd like answered, my suggestion would be pop it in as a video, and you have got a very good chance of getting it answered on the podcast. And our first question is a video question today, Lindsay, and it's from Andy. This is what Andy wants to know.
Andy here from Wigan, Lancashire in the UK. Just signed up for the Faster Beyond 50. I was looking at the training programs. I've got a half marathon in March next year, and I was looking at doing a training program that was the 1 hour 50 for the half marathon. Obviously, it suggests that you're already at a certain level. Now, I've had probably 6 months off running. I'm not quite at that level yet. So I'm just wondering how to build up to what to do prior to starting that training program, where I should start with strength training and just build up slowly so I don't have an injury, which I have done before with starting out too quickly. So yeah, it's just really what sort of program to go for before sort of hit onto that 1 hour 50 program. All right, thanks guys, cheers.
Right, it's a great question from Andy, and it's one that we get quite often, and I think this is actually often one of the mistakes that we all make as runners, is we are super over optimistic about where we want to go and not quite there yet. What advice have you got for Andy?
Yeah, so we've got extremely short memories about what is wrong with us, and then extremely long memories about how good we used to be. And those two things combine to make us run too fast at the start and to try and jump in where we were. So look, it's a really good question. And it's already a great start for Andy in that he just knows that he needs to train for where he is now and not for where he wants to be. So we always train for where we are now with a goal in mind. And then we've kind of got to potentially shift that goal as we go along. But the important part of that is literally just to train for where we are now. So there are really three options whenever we are starting out and coming back from injury in particular. So 6 months is a pretty long time off. So I'll get into what Andy should do specifically, but I always feel like it's important, because it's a podcast, to give some context so that people listening can make the right decisions for themselves. So the three options really are, from our website point of view in particular, we've got some start out right plans, which really transition you very slowly in terms of building up the amount of running and the total volume of the program. So those plans have got run walk strategies in them that transition you from less walking to more running. And they also build up the volume of the running. So it would depend a little bit on how much time you've got available before you need to jump onto the plan for your half marathon, your 10 or whatever it is. But start out right is always a great option. And there's a whole lot of tiers in that start out right. So you can really make sure you start out right for where you are at this specific moment in time. Then we've also got really good options in terms of heart rate based training, which we have based fairly loosely on Dr. Phil Maffetone's MAF training. And that is to limit your intensity through using your heart rate and thereby building up your volume. But the risk of the injury is low because we are making sure that that intensity of the running is really, really low, and thereby building up the strength in your soft tissues, your muscles, joints, and ligaments really slowly over time. And then finally, we've got what we call maintenance plans. Not a great term, especially not in this particular instance, because we're not trying to maintain anything. But those are generally for people that are coming perhaps out of a race, recovering from a race. And so they probably are quite fit, but going straight into hard training won't suit their purpose right now. And it starts to make a year quite long if we are constantly training hard for the next thing all the time. And so those plans will bring back and dial the volume back a little bit, but still focus the training in a way that we can still continue developing you as an athlete, but without really overloading that training or keeping you at a very high level of training for a long period of time. So for Andy, the choices would be that start out right or a math plan. He does have a half marathon, which isn't too far away. And so with that in mind, I would probably want to gather a little bit more information about his 6 month or the running that he did before the 6 month layoff through the injury, because my immediate instinct would be 6 months injury layoff. That's a serious injury. I'd probably prefer to start out right, to build that volume up and the running up really slowly while we are doing the strength training and laying the foundation to reduce the risk of Andy getting injured again. You do have to take in mind the goal at the end of this, and that is a half marathon in March, which is not miles away. And so the temptation will be the math plan is better so that we can get a nice body of training in at a really low intensity, which really reduces that risk of injury. But I would really need to know a little bit more about the nature of the injury and the status of Andy's running before he got injured, before I could finally differentiate between those two options. But both of them allow low risk build up to injury with a focus on strength training for 6 to 8 weeks. Preferably, you would preferably have more time than that, Brad. But when you've got a race at the end of March, that does kind of shrink your time a little bit. So in this instance, it's 6 to 8 weeks, really focusing on strength training and bringing that volume up to the level. And then the final thing for Andy is going to be, when we get to that point, 12 weeks out from race day, has he gotten to the level where training for a 150 is a safe option, or is that going to put him at risk of getting a re-injury? And because that half marathon is so soon, we may have to readjust that goal. But that's a decision we can push out for 6 to 8 weeks.
Lindsay, I'm going to ask a follow-up question here too. And we see it often, and I'm experiencing this now as I get older as well, that when we are younger, like let's say in our 20s or 30s, and we pick up an injury, we tend to bounce back quickly. Like even if it is a long-term injury, like say a 6 month, that we bounce back a lot quicker when we are younger. And one of the challenges as we get older, it takes more time to bounce back. And I often feel like and this is me talking to myself, is like I feel like I want to come back to where I was as quickly as possible. And I'm learning that I need a bit more patience. And I think a lot of us fall into that trap, is we frustrated because we're injured. We love running and we want to get back as quickly as possible. But forcing the issue really does compound the problem. And as we get older, I mean, you talk about it as one of the pillars of your training framework, the Fast to Be on 50 training framework, is consistency is the biggest sort of contributor over time as we get older, because when we do fall off a cliff, essentially, it just takes so much longer to come back to where we were. And sometimes taking one step back where it does feel like we are going backwards, it's probably better for us in the long term. So maybe, and I'm not saying this is the situation for Andy, but maybe the 150 goal isn't practical. Maybe it's closer to 2 hours, but by going for that 2 hours and not pushing for that 150, he's giving himself a better chance of getting to a 150 maybe later on in the year.
Yeah, precisely. And that's literally to my point, is that in 6 to 8 weeks' time, we really have to look properly at where has Andy ended up. And 6 months is a long time out. And the older we get, the more we lose physically and physiologically in those periods of time. Because effectively, as we get older, we are in what we can term a degenerative phase. Not a great word, but that is ultimately what's happening. And by training correctly, what we are doing is we are disrupting that degeneration. And in many cases, when we do it right, we can reverse that degeneration. So that's ultimately what we're going for. But the biggest thing through consistency is we want to disrupt that degeneration so it's much, much slower than it otherwise would be. And pushing too hard too early and re-injuring, that is your biggest risk to actually accelerating that degeneration, because it just means more time out.
Yeah, absolutely. Great question, Andy. If you've got any follow-ups, please feel free to pop them into the forum. Our coaches are there ready every single day to answer your questions. Lindsay, next question from David.
Pacing. So I'm about to do a half marathon in just over a week's time. And in my most recent 5K time trial, I did an average pace of 4 minutes 02 per minute. And when I looked that up in various online calculators, most seem to translate that into a half marathon time of 4:20 to 4:25, somewhere around there. So I have to figure out what pace I'm going to go out in the half marathon without burning out too early. So I think I'm not going to go out at that pace. I think that's a little optimistic. I think I'm going to head for 4:35 or something like that, and then see how I go. But I'd like to hear your views on pacing for longer races based on a 5K time trial reference. Thanks.
Cool stuff, Lindsay. What advice have you got for David?
Yeah, so again, another cool question that needs some context so that other people can make decisions. So the first thing is, what is the information that would be useful to make a more accurate prediction for David and what pace to go out at? So because most of us don't think in relative terms, we think in absolute terms, and those are easier to remember. I have worked out what those numbers mean. So essentially 402 per kilometer equates to a 20.095 kilometer. And in my calculator, that spits out the potential for a 1 hour 33, 1 hour 32.50 something. So let's call it 1 hour 33 half marathon. And that's a 4:24. So those calculators out there are not, hopefully we all end up at a similar number because we've got the experience that's shown us what you can do from 5 to the half marathon. And I'll tell you how you can make those adjustments for yourself personally. But yeah, the calculators that David's found on the internet are giving him between 130 and just over 133. So we're all in the right ballpark there. So how do we make a decision around how do I get from our 5K to the half marathon, and how realistic is that transition? Okay, so the first thing to look at is, how has my training gone on the whole? Okay, so I'm training fairly well. I've trained consistently. I'm nailing my 5K workouts, but between work and kids and family commitments, etc., I am only getting to 2/3 of my long runs, or I'm doing a long run every week, but I'm just not getting to the last half an hour of every long run. And then you can kind of start making some deductions there around the fact that possibly while I'm in good shape, my endurance is going to be a little bit compromised. So I might want to adjust for that half marathon up, or I've nailed my training. I've never done better and more consistent long runs. I've been running them in the right intensities. So I'm not getting to the end of those long runs exhausted, so on. Then we can go, well, actually, I've got a really good chance of transitioning from my 5K to my half marathon because I feel that I'm both fast and I feel like I've got great endurance. So that's the first thing we look at is, where am I now? How's my training gone? Where are the holes in my training that might limit, or where the training is good that it might improve my chances of nailing that success? Then the next thing to look at is, historically, how have I performed in relative terms from 5 to 10 to 21? So do I typically get better or relatively faster compared to my predictions as I go longer. In other words, my strength in my running actually quite literally comes out of my endurance rather than my speed? Or is it the other way around, that I always underperform when I go longer relative to my shorter distances? So that then gives us a clue of how we should adjust our pace going into race day. And then the third and very, very important part of this equation is your race plan. How do you go about getting to the number that you are trying to hit? And that has two aspects to it. The first is the course profile. We've got to plan our race according to what that race profile looks like. Is it a hilly profile? Is it easy at the beginning, hard at the end, very hard at the beginning, easy at the end? So you've got to figure those things out to see how realistic it is to get to that final number. Is it very flat so we can have an extremely even pace strategy? And then historically, have I gone out at too fast a pace? If I'm supposed to run a 4:24 average for 21 Ks, am I doing 4:19, 4:20 for the first 15 and then always finding out that I blow up towards the end? Okay, so those are your three critical steps, is to determine what is possible, to how do I normally, and the training, to how do I normally perform in relative terms, and how has my training gone compared to the previous, and then how do I execute on race day? When we get all those three things together, then you really should have a good chance of predicting what you'll do in the half marathon based on your 5, even if it's not exactly what's on the internet. But using those three things, you can then improve up or down. So, David, that's really what I would ask you is, like, typically, do you perform well relative to 5 or not? How has your training gone? And then, you do strike me as someone that goes out with a good plan in mind. Otherwise, you wouldn't have asked that question. So I feel like the execution part, you're going to do quite well on. And it is now a case of answering those first two questions so you can decide whether 4:25 or maybe a 4:28 to 4:30 per kilometer is a more appropriate pace for you to go out on race day.
What a great question, David. Thank you very much for that. And don't forget, if you have a question you'd like answered, what you can do is just click on the link that's in the description of this video or on the podcast player you're listening on, and you can submit it there. We do filter the video questions up to the top. And then also, just to let you know, if you are interested in pacing and how to perfectly pace a race, doesn't matter what distance it is, we're actually doing a deep dive with Coach Ntutu next week. Where we're going to be going into this in a lot more detail. So we'll really unpack those 3 points that Lindsay spoke about and a lot more. So make sure you don't miss that. If you're not subscribed, hit the subscribe button so that you don't miss out on that episode of the Fast to Beyond 50 podcast as well. Lindsay, great question here. And this is a bit of a follow-up question from the last deep dive we did on recovery, which was really well received. We got so much great feedback about that episode, about how to recover better as an over 50s runner. And this one, funnily enough, is a question from someone who runs with your dad. What a small world. How crazy is that? Has run cross-country with your dad for many, many years. Charles submitted it. Charles is 75 years old. He's a track and field masters athlete and does cross-country during the winter as part of his preseason training. He wants to know, does that same hierarchy of recovery that we spoke about in that deep dive apply for track and field athletes, or is the focus just on long-distance endurance athletes? His track and field events are 400 and 800 meters. He says he trains every day of the week. Normally, his program is Mondays, Wednesdays, Fridays. Those are tempo sessions, muscle endurance intervals, and speed endurance intervals with a total distance of 3,200 meters. The other days are hill repeats, speed, and on Saturdays, casual long run of about 50 to 60 minutes. He says Sunday is his rest day. So he doesn't run 7 days a week. He's running 6 days a week. What advice have you got for Charles? Do those recovery principles apply as much to track and field athletes over the age of 50, and in Charles's case, 75? If you're over 50 and want to recover from sessions faster, run pain and injury free, and improve your endurance, then be sure to join Lindsay and I for our upcoming Faster Beyond 50 Masterclass. In it, we'll show you how we helped a 70-year-old run a 47-minute, 18-second 10K and how you can take those exact same principles and apply them in your training. Simply scan the QR code that's on screen right now or click on the link in the description below to save your seat in the training now. We look forward to seeing you there.
Yeah, so I suppose there's no such thing as humbly bragging. So I guess it's just an outright brag. But we have had some really great involvements in US and UK track and field. We've had some involvements in world records and area records in masters athletes, following very similar principles to what we do on the general platform. So the cross-country part of that question is actually a very easy answer, and that is that absolutely you need to change the way that you approach cross-country as you are moving 50s, 60s, and then in the 70s. I'm starting to see that there's actually a second change that needs to take place because there are some very significant changes in the coordination. So I think that becomes it plays a bigger role as we move into our 70s, where our massive in 50 to 70, our massive focus is on strength. Of course, we also emphasize the coordination and mobility. But when we move into 70, I think there has to be less increased emphasis on the coordination. And I would go as far as saying track and field, that's going to become even more important. Okay. And I've worked fairly closely with a US 400, 800, so same combination. And actually what we found with him is that to get enough of the speed workouts in to both give him the confidence to perform, particularly in the 400, but also that coordination, because running fast requires a high degree of coordination. We've changed the week from a 7-day week to a 10-day week. So instead of going through 3 cycles of training in 3 weeks, we're going through 2 cycles of training in 2 weeks. And I'm explaining that because we really have to emphasize that the basic needs as we get older don't change. We need more time to recover. We need more time for the body to respond to the stimulus that we are giving it. So in this instance, 3 high intensity sessions in a week is way too much. Okay? You're going to more seasons than not going forward, you're not going to get to your main race goal. And so that then becomes a problem. So we are doing 2 really hard sessions through a 10-day cycle. So we're not even extending the week so that we can get to 3. It's just that in most of our frameworks, we are looking at a maximum of 2 per 7-day cycle, but we were finding with the intensity that's required for the 400-800 combo that just compressed them too close together. And so we needed more days so that we could effectively get 1.5 sessions in average in a 7-day cycle, if you want to break it down like that. But that those 10-day cycles, so we were still doing 3 10-day cycles and then a recovery 10-day cycle. But that worked really, really well. And he was able to set PBs and really improve. So, I mean, he's in his 70s too. And instead of getting slower each year, we managed to actually turn that around and get him quite a lot faster, particularly in the 800, but also in the 400, which was important. So the principles absolutely apply. The strength becomes critical. The coordination becomes critical. The recovery is critical. And so you have to start thinking outside the box about how am I going to get to those things? How am I going to get to the workouts that I feel are so important? And then be able to perform on race day. And like he's talking about running 6 days a week. So that's one of the things that we had to change with Gary too, is that we use cross training more. So his frequency of training is probably still similar in terms of doing the number of sessions per week, but some of those have now been replaced with cross training. We've definitely spread the high intensity sessions further apart, and that allows us to carry on doing the strength training because, you know, even as I'm saying this, Brad, you can hear that it's a lot. If you have high goals, then there is a lot that you need to get through in a week. So how can we do that? Well, we change the traditional definition of a week, but we make sure that we get enough recovery. That's key.
Yeah, absolutely. Great question, Charles. And Lindsay, another question. I love this question because we actually haven't had something like this for a while, and I think this is the crux of the matter when it comes to low heart rate running, particularly. And it's from Christine. Christine says, "I'm still trying to safely increase my pace for my long runs, which is about 8 miles for her. I know you recommend slow-paced runs. Does that leave interval training and general strengthening? So, how do you? Let me rephrase it. How do you increase the pace of your longer runs? Do you need to be running them faster? Where does the speed come from, essentially, in your long runs?"
So the first thing we have to get away from, Brad, is we've got to stop talking about these things in terms of speed, and in particular, framing them as slow. It's easy, okay? We want to run easy. Easy doesn't necessarily mean slow. It is true that most people are running their easy and long runs at too high an intensity. And so effectively, the outcome of this is that we need to run our easy runs slower. So the crux is we need to run our easy runs easier. And that's what we need to focus on. So the mistake most people make is that they run their easy runs too hard. We still need the high intensity sessions. We absolutely need the strength. And so when we talk about speed, speed is just one of our controls for intensity, okay? We can use heart rate, we can use RPE. Most people have got a GPS, so it's a very accessible and easy to use mechanism to control our intensity. But it's far better if you can accurately measure heart rate, to actually use heart rate, so we can get away from this talk of slow and fast, because that's not what it's about. Ultimately, we want to run fast in our races. And in order to run our fastest races, we have to train at the appropriate intensities for the design of the sessions that we are doing. Now, north of 80% needs to be at easy intensities for aerobic development to improve our endurance. 15 to 20% of our training needs to be done at higher intensities. And a nice mix of intensities is in there. So we should be doing some hill work, some speed work, some speed endurance work, some tempo runs, those kind of sessions. And those will be run harder. And when we run harder, we will obviously run faster. But it's about doing the appropriate intensity for the appropriate session. And by running too hard on easy days, we limit our ability to run hard enough on hard days. We spend a lot of our time in a fatigued state, which predisposes us to getting sick more often, but it also predisposes us to an increased risk of injury. And it leads us to arrive at race day tired and unable to fulfill our potential. So, yeah, that I think is the crux here. A lot of people struggle to execute their long runs and are very tired in their long runs or can't do their long runs because they physically get tired. And that's a clear sign that the intensity is not right for what you're trying to do. So you need to adjust that intensity, use heart rate, and use walk breaks to really manage that fatigue. I literally got off the phone just a few days ago about the New York Marathon, and one of my clients who ran such a fantastic race, 20 minutes faster than we planned. Now, these majors often throw out all sorts of outliers. You know, the conditions are often way better than what we are accustomed to running in. This particular client is from India, so trains in horrifically hot and humid conditions. So to go to the ideal conditions of New York, plus adding in the crowd, she also traveled with family, and so she had specific points along the route when she felt like she was going to, she kind of foresaw that she was going to struggle because she felt like, wow, I'm going so far ahead of the coach's plan. I have to pay for it at some point. But those little emotive things also helped. But the point being that she, knowing that she was going faster than she should, was making herself walk every 15 minutes. She was doing a walk break. And so I'm telling you that example because on your long runs, if you know that you are going at an intensity that is running against what we advocate, you can adjust for that by making sure you do regular walk breaks. And so she did 2 minute, 1 minute walk break strategy, run 2 minutes, 1 minute on all the hills to really save her legs on the hills. And she did this 1 minute walk every 15 minutes to make sure. And out of her whole traveling contingent, she is the only one that smashed the second half. Everyone else was just struggled because they all went out too hard. It's the New York Marathon. It's very hard to control pace when you've got those kind of crowds and you've got so many people around you. But she was able to counter that enthusiasm by putting a defense in place to force a bit of slowing down through walking. So if you struggle to get the intensity right on your runs, use walking to moderate that intensity. And I would encourage you to get a heart rate, an accurate heart rate reading through a belt so that you can control for that intensity and make sure that easy runs are easy, hard runs are hard.
Yeah, absolutely. Christine, thank you for that question. Great question, Lindsay. As always, I love doing these Q&As. Lots of great questions again this week. Don't forget, if you have a question you'd like answered, you can click on the link that's in the description to this podcast or in the description of the video that you're watching. The link is there, and we do filter video questions up to the top. So please do pop your questions through, pop them onto video if you do want to get them answered. So there you go. The link is in the description. Lindsay, as always, thanks for your time. Much appreciated. And we look forward to catching up again soon.
Okay, brilliant. Take care.